Vladimir Zelensky and European leaders, including Sir Keir Starmer, will speak to Donald Trump in an emergency summit later today. The Ukrainian president will be in Berlin for the virtual meeting, joining the German Chancellor, who is hosting the talks. It comes ahead of the US president's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday, amid concerns that the two leaders will forge the makings of a peace deal without input from Ukraine.
It's impossible to talk about Ukraine without Ukraine, and no one will accept that. So the conversation between Putin and Trump may be important for their bilateral track, but they cannot agree on anything about Ukraine without us.
Well, Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz will host the virtual meeting in Berlin at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Sir Keir Starmer joining alongside the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, plus Volodymyr Zelensky. Also expected to take part France's Emmanuel Macron and the NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte. Then at 2, European leaders will hold a call with both Trump and his deputy J.D. Vance as the meeting between the US President and Russia's Vladimir Putin edges closer. The third and final meeting is scheduled for today. It will be chaired by Sir Keir. He will speak to leaders of the so-called Coalition of the Willing, a group of countries working on plans to support Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. Well, let's bring in our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clarke. Michael, how much legitimately do you think the Europeans can stand to influence the situation?
Well, they have the influence of being able to say that if this deal completely ignores Ukraine's interests, then Ukraine won't agree to it and the war will go on, whether you like it or not. So it won't be a successful peace arrangement that President Trump is trying to pursue. And what it is that the Europeans are particularly concerned about is the idea of territorial swaps that would be completely unacceptable to Ukraine. And if you look at the map of Ukraine, I mean, you can talk about lots of areas up in the north, minor swaps at Sumy and Kharkiv, the problem of Crimea, which is effectively off the table, something in the south, maybe. But what really matters is this, the Donbas, the area of the Donbas, the area of Donetsk, with Donbas is Luhansk and Donetsk. And this area of Donetsk is not conquered by the Russians. The Ukrainians are holding it. And the briefing is that Putin is demanding that the Ukrainians withdraw from that before he will agree to a ceasefire. And that is completely and utterly unacceptable to Zelensky, and he's made that very clear in the last 24 hours, because they've got a very heavily fortified strip of territory here between the 4 cities from Slavyansk through to Kostiantynivka. And if they give up that sort of fortress belt, it'll be much harder for the Ukrainians to prevent the Russians eventually moving further westwards towards the Dnieper River. And so this is their best last line of defence in eastern Ukraine. If they give that up, then the Russians potentially could move much further westwards, as Ukrainians believe they will. Whatever the Russians promise, they will eventually try to move into other parts of Ukraine. And so this is the map, the potential map in a way that really worries the Europeans and Zelensky. And they'll be putting pressure as far as they can on the United States and on Trump to say, please be aware of this when you go into your meeting with President Putin.
European nations, and you talk there about the ability of Ukraine to hold that line, to keep Russia out of that pocket of Donetsk. European nations have enabled that in part through the aid they've given to Ukraine, and not just military aid, but aid across the board. And they've given so much now, they've surpassed the US in doing so. With that in mind, Michael, why does Europe struggle to get any seat at any negotiating table here?
Because ultimately, United States backing is critical to Ukraine. Ukraine wouldn't have lasted this long without the United States. And although it can fight on without any United States help in the future, it will be much harder. And remember, we talk about the US and Europe as if they're comparable groups, as it were. But the US is one country, and it's put in about $120 billion worth of aid, not the 350 that President Trump keeps talking about and quoting. I don't know where he gets that figure from. The real figure is 120 billion. And the Europeans have put in about 260 billion, but the European aid is only just ramped up in the last 18 months or so. And so the importance of the United States is that, you know, without American high-tech weaponry, and particularly without American intelligence help, which has still flowed with 1 or 2 interruptions, but it still flows. Without that, then Ukraine would find it much more difficult to carry on. Not impossible, but much more difficult. And the fact is, you know, you need the superpowers on your side if you're going to resist a power like Russia that's trying to destroy you as an independent country.
Using the hypothetical dice of influence, Michael, how many more rolls does Europe have left?
I'm sorry, how many?
How many more rolls of the dice of influence does Europe have left?
How many more rolls? Yeah, the rolls of the dice. Well, this is the last good one, but I don't think this will be the end of a process. I mean, what happens in Anchorage, I'm sure, will be the beginning of another process of further discussions, further technicalities before a ceasefire might be called. We don't know. President Trump might suddenly turn really tough on President Putin, but it doesn't look as if he's about to do that. On the basis of what's happened so far, this will just carry on for a bit, and the Europeans will still have a voice to be heard. But this is a really important juncture because things could go badly wrong after this meeting. If it really doesn't go well for Ukraine, things could get worse much more quickly. If it's not the worst outcome, then the Europeans will have a couple more rolls of the dice. But this is the best last hope, the best hope in the present period, in 2025 to 2026, in which they could have their voices understood by the Trump administration in Washington. Not just heard, they get heard, but are they understood by the people around Trump and the particular administration officials that are handling all of the background to this meeting?